Welcome to CED Office Hour Live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the April 18, 2024 edition of CED Office Hour Live, where the Community and Economic Development Team, aka CED team, um, has this weekly show where we reach out to the community. We want to connect resources with individuals, business to business connections. It's all about connections and conversation, right? And we want people to be educated on all the different aspects of what community and economic development is and the different ways that you can utilize it to just make your life better and to help make the world go around, right? And so before we get started, I'd like to introduce our team members that are here with us today. And first off, we have Eric Smith, and then we have Ambrose Moses. If you all want to say a quick hello.
Yeah, hi everyone. And Jill, great to be here today, and I'm really looking forward to learning from this conversation. Again, Eric Smith, I'm the Program Extension Associate serving the Community Economic Development Unit here at Central State University Extension, based out of Northwest Ohio and the Findlay Toledo area.
Good afternoon. Ambrose Moses, Extension Educator and Community and Economic Development in the Southwest region and focusing primarily in the Franklin County area. And I want to welcome our guest and I look forward to the discussion.
And I'm Amber Twitty. I'm based in the Southern Ohio portion of the state, the Southern region, and mainly in Cincinnati and Hamilton County. But I serve all the way over to Greater Portsmouth. So these are the three of our team members today. Welcome to Ray. He's one of our show regulars and always has good comments to add. So thank you for supporting us. And before we get started, a couple house rules. This is a conversation format. So this is the one time you don't get in trouble for interrupting and giving your comments or questions. So please feel free to interject when you so feel necessary or just want to, right? And if you don't want to speak directly, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll make sure that your voice is heard by summarizing what you've put in the chat. So interrupt us at any time. It's a conversation. And so before we get started into the subject today, I like to always give a definition of what community and economic development is. So CED looks at how we live, work, play, thrive, and navigate through all those spaces. And one end of the spectrum is the infrastructure side, the economic development side. And that includes things, buildings, affordable housing, highways, bikeways, parks, um, stadiums, in any kind of physical development, creative placemaking, that's art placed in public spaces, right? So that's kind of one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is people development, the development of human capital. So that's professional development, personal development, helping people move towards self-sufficiency, workforce development. It's all of these kind of things. And then it's the connector between the two is the organizations or the organizations, agencies, government, educational institutes, all of us here today, right? Who connect the physical infrastructure with the people and we make the community go round. And as CED professionals, we're like systems engineers. We look at the entire spectrum and based on our subject matter expertise, our bandwidth and resources we have available, we say, hey, here's an area or areas that we can plug and play to help make that better, to help people reach their goals, to make the communities just better, just make the world go around, right? And I like to say the way that we work is we kind of try to work ourselves out of a job. So we come in at the request of that community member, agency, or individual, help them with wherever they are to get to the next level. But we're also empowering them with education and the knowledge and the tools so they continue that work, whatever it may be. And then it's our thing, because we have a good relationship, that when you have a new idea, a new project, then you say, hey, Amber, we want to have you included. And so that's how we keep coming back. But the ownership of those projects and initiatives is the community, is the individual business owner, is the government agency. So we are working with you, we're working for you. We're not here to dictate anything. So that's kind of how we work. And extension is a way for colleges and universities to take programming out to the community, using research as a basis, best practices as a basis to create innovative, practical programming to connect people to resources. So that is how we work. I'd like to introduce Kunta Jackson. He just joined us. He is also on our community and economic development team. Kunta, can you say a quick hello for us real quick and say where you're based? You're muted.
I thought I just unmuted it. Okay, there I am. Hello, everyone. Kunta Jackson, CED educator, Central State University. My territory is Southwest, primarily Montgomery County, and also Clark County, some of the big cities there. I'm sorry, Dayton and Montgomery County and Springfield and Clark County, some of the big cities that we're looking at in the Southeast, and all the other counties around here, Southwest, I'm sorry. So thank you, Amber.
Well, thank you for popping in and joining us today. So without further ado, many of you already know that April is Second Chance Month. And so we wanted to focus on the reentry space. And I took it a step further and said, hey, we know some awesome women in reentry that are just the bomb.com. They're doing awesome work. So this year we decided, hey, let's highlight some of those awesome women. And one of them is our own Jill Bucaro, who is with the law offices of the public defender in Montgomery County. And I'm going to turn it over to her because I could talk all day about her, right? And all the awesome work and that we've been able to collaborate together, but the things she does even outside of our collaboration. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Jill, and we're going to start out with just kind of telling us a little bit about your journey on how you even got to the position and how you elevated where you are a trendsetter, you are a trailblazer in this reentry space throughout the state.
Awesome. Thank you, Amber. I appreciate that super nice introduction. Like you said, my name is Jill Bucaro. I am a social worker by trade. I'm an independently licensed social worker and chemical dependency counselor. And I work at the Public Defender's Office. Ooh, getting a little feedback. I don't know. I think it might be from you, Amber. I don't know if, no. Okay. It was weird. I could like hear my voice. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. So I work at the Public Defender's Office in Montgomery County, which is in Dayton, Ohio. So I've been there almost 5 years, which is crazy how fast time has gone by. But I started there in November of 2019 for the purpose of starting what we call kind of in the field or in the trade holistic defense practice. And what holistic defense basically says and what it stands on is that most people that are caught up in the criminal justice system have a lot of other stuff going on, right? That has caused them to be caught up in the system in the first place. They might be struggling with mental health or addiction, homelessness, generational poverty, living in just super, marginalized and divested areas, right? So the goal of the holistic defense practice is to not only advocate for individuals to help them kind of rectify some of those issues, right, or get them on the right path, but also to look at some of these systemic things at play, right? And how do we try to change the system so that we're not criminalizing poverty, we're not criminalizing mental health, and we're not criminalizing addiction and homelessness and things like that. So, back like in the, 2000 teens, they were starting to add social workers to public defenders' offices in big cities across the country. So you saw it like in the Bronx, in Seattle, New Orleans, Nashville, Denver, Chicago, places like that. And my boss, who is really an innovator, I think she's super creative. She was like, what if we tried it here? Is there a need? Could we make it happen in a small mid-sized city like Dayton? And what we saw very quickly is, yes, there absolutely is a need. And in November 2019, there was just one of me. I was kind of a one-woman circus for a year or so. And right now we actually have, fast forward 4 years later, we have 16 members of our holistic defense team that are providing advocacy for clients of our office and also doing some of the work that you've been talking about already, Amber, in the community to just try to help our community as a whole through the lens of like criminal justice advocacy. So that's a little bit about me. My team of social workers, we're doing a lot of work to reduce the number of days people spend incarcerated, also to reduce recidivism, and doing that on an individual level. But what I spend my time doing is some of this more like system-wide work. How can we serve our community? How can we make sure people are aware of opportunities or services that address the collateral consequences of criminal justice involvement, and just making some of those services free and available to our community members. So that's kind of what I do. And really, I'm kind of here. I know Amber through my, I guess, involvement with the Reentry Coalition in Montgomery County, because I am our legal subcommittee co-chair. And we do a ton of work through the subcommittee, specifically around addressing collateral consequences of criminal justice involvement. So when we talk about that, certainly when somebody catches a criminal charge, they're going to face sanctions, right? They might have to spend time in jail. They might have to pay costs and fines. They're going to have something on their record. But what we don't always talk about is the collateral consequences of that me stealing something from a Walmart 10 years ago could affect my housing today, could affect my employment opportunities today, could affect, my ability to like get a loan, my ability to buy a car, my ability to get insurance, right? All of these types of things. We don't talk as much about those collateral consequences, which can be, there for a lifetime for a bad decision we made a decade, 2 decades, or 3 decades ago. So what we try to do in the legal subcommittee is to help mitigate some of those collateral consequences. So we do a lot of work around record sealing and expungement. We work to help people get their driver's licenses reinstated, try to do some education around like other legal rights, like what rights do we have as returning citizens or individuals with things on our background around like visiting with our kids, custody of our kids, right? How can we make our child support be something that is affordable? All of those types of things. So I don't know, Amber, I just talked forever. I don't know if you want me to go into detail on some of that stuff or what would be helpful now.
Oh, you're on mute.
And I was just talking. Let's talk, let's shift a little bit, just talking about what's the differences between expungement, record sealing, and pardons. You can talk about the work, but it's kind of like people say discrimination, or they'll say prejudice, but they really mean discrimination, right? And it's that same kind of thing. Everybody says expungements, but those are very different in the success rate of getting them versus record sealing. So if we can kind of say what they are and talk about the nuances, the differences between them, that would be great.
Awesome. And this is where I wish I had a lawyer here with me. But I think I can hit the highlights, right? In layman's terms. So, So record sealing versus expungement. So what's I think is also important to note here is that record sealing and expungement is going to differ state by state. So in the state of Ohio, you might be able to seal or expunge past charges that you cannot seal in another state, right? That I could not seal in Indiana or Florida or Colorado or Georgia. Record sealing and expungement is a state by state thing that happens. So it's based on state laws, state statutes, and is determined by the state's legislature. So I think that's important to note, because, you know, sometimes people have charges in other states. They talk to, like, you know, an attorney or somebody who does record sealing like me in Ohio, and we're like, oh yeah, that should be something you can seal. And it is something you can seal here, but it's not necessarily something you can seal somewhere else. So I always want to make that just distinction, right? So when we talk about record sealing in the state of Ohio, we have passed so many laws in the last 4 years that have changed up how we can seal and expunge records in our state. Like, I think there have been 4 major legislative changes around record sealing and expungement just since I've been in my job, right? And I told you guys earlier, I haven't even been here 5 years yet. So it's kind of crazy, and it's interesting, right? Because it's ever changing. So right now, in this moment, in April of 2024, we have the opportunity, kind of for the first time since I've been doing the work in the state of Ohio, to have some charges both sealed and expunged. Okay. Prior to this last big set of legislation that went through last year, the vast majority of charges in Ohio could only be sealed. So let's talk about, to your point, Amber, what is record sealing? So record sealing is essentially kind of what it sounds like. It's sealing the record. It's hiding the record from public view. So if I were to run a background check on somebody who has had their record sealed as just like a regular run-of-the-mill landlord, employer, human being, I would not be able to see the record, right, of someone whose record has been sealed. It exists, but it is hidden, right? It is hidden from me as just kind of a regular person in the community. It is not necessarily hidden from prosecutors, right? From people who have the, like, if you're applying for a federal job or a state job or some medical jobs that require licensing, not necessarily hidden from licensing boards, but for all intents and purposes, very helpful in terms of employment, in terms of qualifying for different types of housing. Landlords aren't going to be able to see it, that kind of stuff. So that is record sealing. The record is still there, but it is like hidden from view, right? Record expungement, when using that term correctly, expungement means that the record is actually destroyed, so it no longer exists. I think that feels like a big promise now, especially in this day and age of, you know, like the internet and everything else, and how people, you know, how we store information, right? Like back in the day when you had something expunged, like, you know, you truly probably, they were taking the file and like putting it in a shredder, you know, in the court records building, but everything is stored electronically. So expungement feels a little bit more nebulous now, if that makes sense. But in theory, that's what expungement is, that the record is literally destroyed. So I, normal Jill, normal landlord, employer, citizen of the world, cannot see it. And in theory, no one can see it, right? Because it does not exist. That is expungement. Pardons are a little bit, oh, I'm sorry, Ambrose, did you have a question?
Oh, well, you could go on. I was just going to ask, how does the like current technology play into this, in terms of if someone has a private database and they have collected this information and it gets sealed by the government later or expunged, you still have this private database.
Exactly. And that's something that people run into a lot of the time. So yeah, usually like these companies that do background checks, right? They're pulling all the data from public record, right? From all the different court records. And then they're holding it, just like you said, Ambrose, in their database, right? So what happens sometimes is people seal or expunge their records, and then like a couple weeks later, they go to a job interview, and the job runs a background check, and boom, there are all the charges that are supposedly sealed and expunged, right? And what has happened is that database has not reconciled reconciled their data with what is now available via public record. The charges are gone from the public record, but the public record has not been reconciled with the database. So usually we tell people to give yourself like a couple month grace period, right? To let those kind of databases recalibrate with the accurate information that is available on public record to be able to kind of account for that.
Okay. Does the law require the private databases to remove it or not report it?
So yeah, so I'm sure there is. I'm sure there's some sort of like standard where they have to like reconcile, right, their records every so often. I do not know what that is. What I also know to be true, this is a lot of work, and there are actually services that you can pay to do this for you. You could reach out to some of those major like record checking companies and some of those major databases, provide them with your sealing and expungement paperwork, right, that you'll get with the court, and they will have to remove you at that time, you know, prematurely, even before their stuff reconciles. So I do know there are some services, like some people, especially if you have the funds, but let's be honest, a lot of people don't, right, have an extra $500 or $600 after they've paid all of these filing fees, right, to have their stuff sealed and expunged. You can work with one of those services who will essentially do that work for you, right? They'll reach out to the major databases and say, hey, listen, I'm sending you this person's proof that their stuff has been sealed or expunged. Please remove them, you know, from your database. So that is like a little hustle that kind of happens too in this space. But again, most people can't afford that. And most people think, you know what, I'll just wait it out a couple months, right, and let everything clear out. But sometimes, you know, if you are going for a certain job, or we see people certainly who are trying to get licenses at the state, whether it's like nursing licenses, social work licenses, chemical dependency licenses, it does make sense for them to pay for that service. So that is record sealing expungement. Yeah.
So with that, you know, once your record has been sealed, essentially you're eligible now to immediately go apply for an apartment and the landlord can't see it. That is the spirit of that record sealing, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Kunta, did you have a
question?
Yeah, for the expungement, what's the time frame on that? And someone that's going, like you said, maybe for a state job, registered nurses, stuff like that. What's the time frame on that for someone that gets their record expunged? And is there a look back period for those employers and things like that? Can you elaborate on that?
Good question. Yeah. So the time frame is tricky because record sealing and expungement happens at the court level. So if I have a charge out of Vandalia Municipal Court that I want sealed, it's Vandalia Municipal Court who's going to grant the motion to seal it and who's going to take it from their public record. If I want to seal a charge in Miamisburg or in Springfield or at the county level, right, each individual court is in charge of doing that. And of course, you know, it would be so wonderful if everybody had the same form and the same time frame and the same process, but we know that is not the case, right? So it really depends. I would say on average, from the time that somebody files the paperwork that says, hey, I want to seal, you know, this charge or these charges with the court, I think like a reasonable time frame is 3 to 6 months. The vast majority of records are going to be sealed or expunged within that time frame. Sometimes it might be shorter, sometimes it might be longer. It just depends. What's also important to note here, I guess, is that record sealing and expungement is like a court proceeding, right? So you are filing in the docket of that case. So let's say back in the day, we'll use my same example. I like stole something from Walmart, right? I had a theft on my record. Everything that happened with that case is going to be in the docket, right? They're going to see that I was provided with an attorney. They're going to see that I pled out, right? They're going to see that I was ordered to pay costs and fines, that, you know, there was restitution, right? All of that is going to be in those docket entries. 10 years later, 12 years later, when I go to seal that charge, that motion to seal the charge is going to go in that same court record. Does that make sense? And so it'll go in there that Jill Bucaro has petitioned to seal this. And at that point, actually, the prosecutor has the opportunity, if they so choose, to say, no, I don't think Jill should seal her record, and here is why. So that hardly ever happens, right? I don't want to scare anybody from doing that. I think I've seen it literally happen one time. But that can happen too. And then the court can decide. Sometimes I can file that motion and say, hey, I want to seal my record. And the court will always do some sort of investigative process. Usually that lives in their probation department, right? Their probation officer will launch a quote unquote investigation. They will make sure that the charge is eligible for sealing, that I am eligible to have that charge sealed. I'm not on probation or parole or have an active case or something like that. And then they will kind of make that determination. And at that point, some courts will just mail me a letter and be like, hey, Jill, thanks for applying. Your record's been sealed. All the best of luck, right? Some courts will mail me something and say, you need to appear for a hearing, right? And then the judge will let you know yes or no if we're going to seal your record. And again, each time it's different. So depending on how long that investigation takes, depending on if the prosecutor, wants to contest it in any way, depending on if you have to show back up at the court or if you just get the letter, that's where the lengths can kind of vary. But I will say, just anecdotally from what I've seen, it's typically, if you give yourself kind of a 6-month frame, hopefully you would have your record all sealed within that time with the various courts if you have multiple charges. And then as far as look back goes, no, because once it's sealed or expunged, it's sealed or expunged. The only time you're going to kind of see that residual, like it's still popping up, would be in the cases that Ambrose and I were kind of talking about, where just these different databases have not reconciled their records yet.
So one of the things that we kind of see in the space now is employers have kind of changed that kind of do you have a criminal background, right? Question. So now in January, feel free to hop in too, okay? On the conversation. So how can a person who's had their record sealed, and I think now employers might say, have you ever had a criminal record? It's just the way that they ask it. They're asking it to get around, the laws and everything. And if I had a record and I was like, I sealed it, but if I say that this question is asking, did I ever have a record? And if I say yes, now I'm opening up the can of worms, but I know that it's sealed. So, what to do. Do you have any suggestions on how a person can kind of address that on their applications?
So I can speak a little bit to the work that our legal subcommittee is doing. And we have a lot of lawyers, Amber knows this, on our legal subcommittee. And that is kind of a project they're working on, because I think it's important to kind of note how that has changed. So a lot of times in the past, job applications would say, like, do you have any, criminal convictions? Often it says, like, do you have any criminal convictions other than traffic offenses, right? Like, that was like a really common question. And if you had your record sealed or expunged, you could just say no, right? Because you don't have any convictions on your record. What we're seeing now is a lot of wording that's like, have you ever been convicted, of a crime other than a traffic offense that has been sealed, expunged, or pardoned, right? Or have you ever, and they're kind of like looping in, like, did you have something before it was sealed or expunged, which you didn't used to see on regular job applications. I think it's in response to all of those legislative changes I was talking about earlier that's really opening up record sealing, and people are starting to feel some type of way about that, right? Like, oh my gosh, somebody could have had 32 charges sealed and now they're working for me. So they're changing up the language. The short answer, which is not the answer that anybody wants, is legally we don't really know what people have to disclose. That is kind of what my group of attorneys, they're doing like legal research right now as to what has to be disclosed, because the short answer is we don't know. It hasn't really been challenged. There's not a lot of case law around it. In January, I'll let you jump in, but that's what we're telling people right now is really like use your discretion. But it's tough because we don't know. Go ahead.
Well, I was just, and this is
And January, introduce yourself first.
My name is January, and I'm a program coordinator with the Montgomery County Office of Reentry. I'm also a restored citizen. But my thoughts about the record sealing specific, especially if it's any kind of professionals boards, you would have to disclose, right? Because they are going to have access to a sealed record as opposed to an expunged record in Ohio anyways.
Correct. Yeah. So that's something that has always kind of been in existence for licensed professionals, is that you've always had to disclose even if things were sealed or expunged. Like I told everybody at the beginning, I'm an independently licensed social worker. I do have charges on my record that have been sealed, right? And when I had to apply for the licensure, I had to speak to those charges. That's pretty typical. I think the weird trend that we're seeing is like when you're just doing an application to like a restaurant or a factory, or like a lot of what we would consider like these entry-level jobs or semi-skilled kind of trades and professions that were never asking these types of questions before. All of a sudden, like, yeah, the Dairy Queen application says, like, do you have any charges that you've received, you know, record sealing, expungement, or a pardon for? And people are like, what? You know, and landlords are asking the same thing, which, yeah, to your point, January, that's always kind of been a thing when you're working with children, elderly, vulnerable populations, or like state licensing boards, but we're seeing it almost consist, like everybody has changed their application. And I do think it's an indirect response to how available record sealing is to Ohioans now. And I guess hopefully, Amber, our hope is to try to put together like a one-pager, some community education that when we are doing our different record sealing clinics or services, or January's working, you know, with her team, with individuals who are returning to our community, that we would be able to just like provide this kind of like, whether it's a flow chart or a tips and tricks or a do's and don'ts, but legally it is very, very murky. And that's kind of what we're working through at the moment.
And as I expressed to you earlier, in other meetings that we've had, our team would love to, we call those in extension world fact sheets.
Yes.
And so we would love to co-brand a fact sheet with you, and then help get that word out as part of our reentry programming. So
I'm hopeful.
Yes. So can you all speak a little bit even on with the Pardon Project? The University of Dayton's law school is in partnership with the governor's office on this initiative. Can you talk a little bit about that project?
Absolutely. So one thing that I probably should have said, I want to kind of touch on two things about record sealing. So the last big legislative change that came up for record sealing really changed the way we think about record sealing in Ohio. So up until last year, you were either a person that could seal your whole record or a person who could seal none of your record, right? And there were all of these like weird rules, like there were certain charges that couldn't be sealed. And if you had too many charges, you couldn't seal any charges. If you had offenses of violence, you could only have this many charges. It was like the most confusing thing ever, right? But until then, you were either a person who could seal or expunge or a person who could not. After the law changed last year, it now has nothing to do with the person. It only has to do with the charge, right? So now there are certain charges that can be sealed and certain charges that cannot. I can be a person that has some charges that can be sealed and some charges that cannot. And at any time, I can petition to have the ones that can be sealed, and I just have to live with the ones that are not eligible for sealing or expungement on my record. Does that make sense? So that really opened it up. And it still can be useful, right? Like if I'm somebody that maybe has 7 or 8 convictions, one of them is a domestic violence, I know I can never seal that domestic violence, right? Domestic violences cannot be sealed. But I have 6 other charges that can be sealed, you know, thefts, disorderlies, possessions, like more stuff like that. It's still nice because it cleans up my record, right? So now when somebody runs my background check, instead of seeing 7 convictions, they only see 1. Now, often the charges we can't seal tend to be charges that are more violent in nature, sexually oriented in nature, things like that. But I still think that some of that like sticker shock, right, goes away when somebody only has 1 or 2 charges on their record as opposed to 13 or 14. So I always like to give that disclaimer when I'm out talking, because up until a year ago, there were, thousands of Ohioans that thought I can never seal my record, right? But what I want to tell them now is you might not be able to seal your whole record, but chances are you can seal some of the things and clean that up. So that's the first thing I wanted to share. The second thing that I think is important to kind of introduce the pardon conversation is the types of charges that are never going to be eligible for sealing or expungement. And those are felony 1s and 2s. Those can never be sealed or expunged. Domestic violences can never be sealed or expunged. The vast majority of sexually oriented offenses, particularly those that cause people to have to register, are never going to be able to be sealed or expunged. So there is one other path, particularly with individuals for felony 1s and 2s, that allows them to get those charges off their record, and that is through a pardon. And a pardon is something in the state of Ohio that is done by the governor, and the governor essentially looks at this person, they look at their application, they see that they have been restored, they have not been in trouble. We'll talk about some of the qualifications for it in a minute. And they say, even though these charges are not eligible to be sealed, I am going to pardon them, right? I, the governor, am going to use my executive powers to essentially seal them via pardon, if that makes sense. So we see that is very useful for individuals who have felony 1s and 2s, drug possessions, robberies, burglaries, things like that. There's still some things that cannot be pardoned. Domestic violences cannot be pardoned. Certain murders cannot be pardoned. Again, sexually oriented offenses often cannot be pardoned. But if for somebody who has a robbery on their record from 1997, right, and has been out of prison and doing well for 20 years without getting in trouble, a pardon is a really great pathway for them to get that off of their record. To be eligible for a pardon, you cannot have been in any legal trouble or had any legal involvement for 10 full years. So you have to have 10 years without any sort of charges or legal involvement from the time that you got off probation, got off parole, paid all your fines and costs on your cases. That's 10 years to be able to apply for a pardon. And so pardons have always existed in our state, but Governor DeWine recognized that a pardon is a really lengthy process. It really requires a lawyer. It would be very hard to apply for a pardon on your own. And he's like, wow, people don't have the time or the money to do this. So he funded pardon projects all over the states. And the pardon projects basically live in law schools. And then people can work with these different pardon projects who will help compile their pardon applications and send them off to the governor for free. So ours here in Dayton is at the University of Dayton Law School. And they have you can refer to them on an ongoing basis, but they also do screening clinics and stuff throughout the year as well. So that is a pardon. And it takes a long time, a year or two. Yeah.
And so now let's talk about CQEs. Because that is another option as well. January, please jump in.
What's January? Why don't
she's like she wants to talk, and I keep telling her jump in the conversation. This is a conversation. We encourage people to interrupt and just join in and start talking.
You want to talk about CQEs, January, yes, since everybody's probably tired of me talking at this point.
Well, I'm not sure that I can eloquently tell you the legal facts of a CQE. Because I always defer to the worksheet that Ohio Department of Rehabilitation has on their website. And I can tell you that I am a recipient of the CQE because I cannot, not eligible for full record sealing or expungement. So a CQE was the next best alternative for myself. And that is a certificate qualification for employment. And what I know about it is it allows for discretionary hiring from employers who maybe have an Ohio revised code that says you cannot work in this field. So I applied for the CQE based upon the collateral sanction because I wanted to get into the chemical dependency field. I also wanted to get into the social work field, and I was having difficulty I was able to get licensed as a chemical dependency counselor and a social worker, but I was having an issue trying to gain a part-time job is what it was. I was already licensed and I already had full-time employment and was looking for secondary employment, and they denied me. They denied me based upon my background, but were unable to tell me why they were denying me. When I asked them what about my background they were disqualifying me for, they didn't have any answers. They couldn't tell me if it was like, don't apply ever, come back in 3 years, 5 years, it's this offense. They had no answers except for, we encourage you to apply for a CQE. So I applied for the CQE. There is an application on online through Department of Corrections. It's a pretty lengthy application. I was able to navigate it myself. However, places such as our office at the Montgomery County Office of Reentry, and I'm sure with the Public Defender's Office and other legal teams in the area, will sit down and help a person go through that process, because it is about 15 pages. So you complete that application, prove your restoration efforts, send that off to Department of Corrections here in Ohio. They will approve or disapprove the application. However, once it is approved, they kick that back to you, and you can then go file your petition in your local county that you reside in. So it would not be the county where your offenses are, but it would be the county that you reside in. I took that down, filed that through the courts. For myself, I had to pay for that process. At the time, it had costed me around $100. From my understanding, there is an indigent filing for those who cannot afford to pay to file that. I was not a person who got a court date. I just received my certificate through email. The whole process took me about 4 months at that time. It varies based upon person to person. From my understanding, some people do get a court date and have to go to court. For whatever reason, I just received mine through email, and cool, I was able to utilize it. Now, they do say to be very specific about when you apply for your CQE to list what you are using it for, because it doesn't have to be honored and acknowledged in various capacities. If you say you're only using it maybe to get your social work license, but then you take it over here to try to gain employment, that looks like two different asks of the same certificate. So they say to be more specific, general and specific, in what you are using that certificate for. I will say that I used it for housing. It is not used for that. That is not its purpose or intent. However, when I applied for an apartment complex and they told me no, 10 years post conviction, working for the local government, state license, to have degrees, make 3 times the rent, have good credit. They said, prove your restoration efforts and your community ties and supports. So that was one of the tools that I have that does have a sealed stamp of approval toward my restoration efforts. So I did utilize that in that capacity, despite it not being intended for that, and along with other forms of advocacy. I did go back now, so it doesn't have, the employer doesn't have to accept it. But in my situation, I do know that it worked, because I went back to that same employer for an internship. I had to go back through the background process. It takes 30 days for somebody who has a background for it to return. And so I was, nervous the whole time. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? Well, they never even said anything. So I'm like, hey, please answer, tell me. But it worked. It worked. I was able to get the internship there.
And another thing I like to add is and this is for employers, when you have a person who has a CQE, you give that to your insurance company, because that's notifying that insurance company that they can't raise your general liability type of insurance because you're hiring someone who had a past record. So that is a business case for CQEs as well. And one of the areas that I want to work in is making businesses aware of that, because CQEs have been around at least 10 years now, at least, or more. And
yeah, That's really
most
good.
employers never even heard of it every time I bring it up. So that is something, that's an area of opportunity, Kunta, in this reentry space and working with the businesses, because we work a lot as a team in that entrepreneur and small business sector. And so this is something that we can tell them about. And I always say, personally, someone with a record, um, and if they've come through one of these programs or come through the Office of Reentry for services, um, it's almost like the Office of Reentry becomes that employee assistance program for that business, right? You have extra support, extra additional knowledge. So really, someone who's come through your programming, to me, is less risk because you have more information. They've had extra training. There's people who don't have records and their soft skills are horrendous at best, right? So, um, but this is someone who has had extra training in the soft skills. He has, if something is going on, they have immediate resource to help mitigate that before it becomes a problem in the workplace. So, and plus just basic assessments, right, and testing. So I always try to make that as a business case for employers, because you still have that fear factor and they're still in this 1950s mode. And you know yes, you're supposed to go get a job, but I can't hire you because you have a record, but I can go back to jail if nobody hires me. So you're in this between a rock and hard spot. So I'm glad that Ohio as a state has made such progress, because that's not the same case in other states. And by the way, last week we had Deanna Hoskins on, and she was the one who started the offices of reentry in Ohio. And she's at Just Leadership USA now. So she's taking the same work she was doing in our state now, and she's on a national platform. So when that video comes available, I will send it to you guys. So she had some awesome things that I think you all will be interested in. It's aligned with some of the work that you're doing outside of our discussion today. So I'll make sure you get that when it's ready. But January, thank you for sharing your story and testimony, because that shows you're living testimony on how you can overcome things, and sharing what the challenges are, because that's real important, so people know what the expectations are. Sometimes they say, okay, I need it right away, but yours was a process, right? And you had to try different ways again and again, and you got innovative. Hey, I need my housing, so here's something else for you, right? So it's another use of something that I wouldn't have thought about using it, right? So thank you for that. Are there any other questions or comments? I also put the link around CQEs from the state webpage in the chat as well. Is there anything else that you all, Jill and January, you would like to talk about? What are some things that you just would like to do in this space that you haven't been able to do yet?
I think the biggest need that I see, I think our state legislature has done a nice job of making record sealing available to a lot of people, right? What I see as a huge barrier for people in our community is driver's license reinstatement. And that's a barrier that's entirely monetary. People owe thousands of dollars to individual courts that are issuing warrant blocks. People owe thousands of dollars to the BMV. There was some kind of sweeping stuff that our state BMV did in 2019 and 2020 to try to reduce those fines and fees to the state Bureau of Motor Vehicles. And the state is very good at allowing people to get on payment plans. But where people are really having issues getting their licenses is at paying off these different traffic tickets, costs and fines associated with small petty criminal charges at the municipal court level. And our municipal courts are really doing nothing to kind of acknowledge this need or mitigate this problem. People will call, Dayton Municipal Court or the Western Division Court, and they owe like $3,000, right, in fines. And a lot of the courts around here will be like, well, I'll cut you a deal. like, you don't have to pay $3,000, you only have to pay $1,800. And it's like, okay, well, that's the same, right? For most people, like, that's not going to make a world of difference, right? So I think we need to really start to think at like a policy level of how are we going to reduce these barriers to driver's license reinstatement? Because I think we could all agree that we want drivers who are licensed, who have been through driver's ed, who are driving legally. That's who we want, who are insured, right? Those are the people that we want on the road, but our local courts and the policies around it are really making that impossible. And there's just no money available to individuals to get their licenses back. And so that to me is kind of like the next frontier, right? The next thing we really need to look at in our state. How are we going to get our arms around that issue?
In January, is there anything you'd like to add or any other areas that you're just personally looking to work on? And then I'll get to Eric's comment after that.
There has been mention of trying to create a CQE for housing. So that is something that I would like to see, because when is enough enough? On one hand, I understand people want to make sure that the communities that they are overseeing are safe. And when does your debt to society end if you have already done what the courts have asked you? When do you get to redeem yourself from that? When do you get to meet the qualifications for housing without the background still haunting and saying, if people don't have somewhere to live, your neighborhood's not safe. Your community is not safe if folks do not have somewhere that they can live and shelter and be safe, because they are going to be pigeonholed into survival mode, as creatures of survival instincts. People are going to survive, so I would like to see more done around housing. That's kind of my passion right now.
Okay, well, we'll talk. I have a housing background, so that's one of my passions. Shashonda said my son had to file bankruptcy to get his license back for a fender bender that the other driver's insurance company came after him for, because the truck he was driving, he wasn't insured under. So basically, he had insurance, but he didn't have it under the vehicle that he was driving. Also, Eric had a question. So basically, he's saying, so if I'm listening to this conversation, which has been so helpful, insightful, so thank you. And I want to pursue record sealing, CQE, etc. What is my first step? How does a person begin that process?
So if the person is in the state of Ohio, so first of all, whatever state your charges are in, you're going to need to connect with some sort of provider or attorney there to help you. If you are in the state of Ohio, I will just go ahead and plug our record sealing program at the Public Defender's Office in Montgomery County. You can go to our website, which is www.mcpd, so Montgomery County Public Defender. So www.mcpdohio.com. And right on there is our form to sign up for record sealing. And the way that works is you complete the form. Thank you, Amber. And our attorney and paralegal team reviews it, and then they will be in touch. And if you are eligible to have some or all of your charges sealed or expunged, they will prepare that paperwork for you free of charge. What January alluded to is whenever you file something in the court, there is a filing fee. However, if you are below a certain income threshold, we can do a fee waiver form for you, so you do not have to pay to file, right? So then the entire thing would be free. Always the preparation of the forms is free for our program, but sometimes if you're over income, you are going to have to pay to file with the different courts. So what we will do through that program is we will do your record sealing and expungement paperwork. If we think you're eligible for a pardon, like you have a charge that can't be sealed, but we think it could be pardoned, we will make that direct connection with the pardon project for you, or we will recommend a CQE in instances where individuals cannot have their records sealed or expunged or pardoned entirely. I would say always keep an eye out in Dayton, in the Dayton area. Our Dayton Metro Library does consistent record sealing clinics. You're starting to see those kind of crop up across the community and across the state. So I would just keep an eye out for events like that. And then, of course, if you have charges in another state, you would want to reach out to maybe like a legal aid, a public defender's office in that state or in that county where you incurred your charges, or hire an attorney in that state to help you with the paperwork. One thing I will say too, a lot of courts, both in Ohio and around the country, all of the paperwork that you do, you can do on your own. You don't need a lawyer, right? Having a lawyer do it, make sure you fill it out correctly, that you're doing everything you need to do. But sometimes just as simple as going to that court's website, a lot of the individual courts have their record sealing forms online printable in PDFs for people. So I would look that way as well.
Yeah, because I know here in Hamilton County, which is the Cincinnati, Ohio area, the public defender has record sealing clinics every other week.
Wow.
And he allocates staff to do that. So like every other Wednesday, that's records clinic day, right? And they even have someone from the juvenile court system. So if you had something that was bound over or your juvenile court record is still being seen, you can get all of that done in one swoop. They do the fee waivers. They got a grant so that it's an online signature process. So if you have, as a lot of people do, come in and get their record sealed, more than one charge, instead of filling out the same paper over and over and over and over again, you know, a lot of it is your name, address kind of thing. It populates that for you. So it streamlines the process. And on average, it takes a person maybe 45 minutes to go through each of their stations. So it's a well-oiled machine. The only part that they're missing is that CQE process, right? That's still kind of, they haven't incorporated that in that process yet. But Montgomery County, Hamilton County are really rocking it out as far as those record sealing clinics. In Cincinnati, you have the NAACP will host them. Urban leagues throughout the state will host them. So there are record sealing clinics going on. The Ohio Justice Policy Center will partner with different agencies to host them. So there are plenty of opportunities. But if you don't see a record sealing clinic in your area, the first place to call is your Office of Reentry or the Public Defender's Office to get that information. So one of the things that I would like to see with the record sealing clinics is to be able to do them more in the rural areas. So Jill and I have had conversations around that because when you go into rural areas, they don't have a large public defender's office. They don't even have an Office of Reentry. Some areas might have a coalition of people who kind of made a informal coalition to try to address some of those things, but there's not a lot of resources out there. Some of those counties use legal aid as the public defender, right? So it's very limited. So one of the things I would like to see is, and we tested it with Montgomery County and Greene County during COVID, was doing these online record sealing clinics, right? And I would like to see that. So we got most of the kinks out, but we still got one more piece to make that happen. But that's what I would like to see, because records aren't just made in the main cities, right? They're made all over. So why not connect those resources? That would be one way we could connect those resources to those in the rural areas throughout our state. So are there any other questions or comments? Oh, this is a first. Okay. So without further ado, wait a minute, Shashonda is typing something.
Well,
Hasn't
I
popped
have
up yet.
a comment
ahead.
while she's typing. I just want
Okay.
to just let you know, great job on this form here, and that I was actually had a pleasure to meet in January at the um, Fatherhood Summit. So can't forget your name because you can't forget Kunta as well. So, but yeah, we just want to, here at, of course, Central State, we would love to get more involved in space. Of course, Amber and Ambrose have already been involved. Just want to throw my name in the hat, just as you know, you think about partner and things that we can do to assist in this space. We're here, and as Amber said, we always here to think of innovative programs that's going to uplift folk and help them move forward and improve their situation. So we're here for that. So thanks.
And Shashonda said, as always, this was awesome. So she enjoyed the segment today. Um, Once again, just want to thank you, Jill. Thank you, January, for joining us as well, for taking time out of your busy schedules, because I don't see how you all get all that accomplished sometimes, because you all get pulled in a lot of different directions at the same time. But you always put people first, right? And the clients first, and very clear on why you don't lose sight of your job, right? You are here to serve, and you all serve them very well. So I always like to give you your flowers, right? So thank you for joining us today. And this will conclude this week's edition of Women of CED Office Hour Live, Women in Reentry. And we've been looking at it from a holistic way to close out the month. Next month, we will be talking, Jill, about the municipal court system and some of the special dockets that exist in Hamilton County. We will have the Honorable Judge Janaea Trotter Bratton, and she's one of the leaders in this space, and she has a court that deals with human trafficking. So instead of the victims being criminalized, right, now they are having an opportunity to become viable citizens and getting workforce development training, personal and professional development training as well. And so she'll be talking about that special court docket, as well as just what municipal court is, what it has done, things like that. We had Judge Nicole L. Sanders from Hamilton County, and she does the drug court, and they're the only certified drug court in the state of Ohio. And she was the common pleas judge over that. So we talked about that. So like I said, we have some awesome women doing some awesome things in this reentry space. And we just wanted to highlight all of the good things and that you all do. We appreciate you, and just thank you for joining us, and see everybody next week, next Thursday at 2 p.m. online. Take care. Bye-bye.